We are going to continue in the fake ID series, and Pastor Brandon has done a great job of kind of laying out the reality that we have to understand who we are, right? It's really important that as followers of Christ, as believers, that you have a fresh understanding regularly of who you are in Him. That there's so many things that come our way that can distract us, that can get us off course. And last week, Pastor Brandon talked about Elijah and how he called down fire from heaven, and like who doesn't want to do that? Let's be real, right? Who doesn't want to call down fire from heaven? Who doesn't want to pray that it would stop raining in West Virginia? Come on, somebody, right? Like he prayed that it wouldn't rain, and it didn't rain for a long time, 3.5 years, and then he prayed that it would rain, and it rained. Like, it was incredible. And then suddenly he got distracted and really just became depressed because he forgot who he was. He thought he was all alone. And even in the beginning of the series, we talked about how God specifically had identified some of the characters in scriptures and wanted them to know who they were. And I want to continue in that vein this morning, just so that you make sure that you understand who you are as a follower of Christ. And so we're gonna begin by looking at a passage in Genesis chapter 37. And in this story, this is one of my favorite stories. The story of Jacob has his kids, and you know he has this favorite kid. He's the kid that tells on his older brothers. You know, he tells all the bad stuff that they're doing. Hey, Dad, I just want to let you know they didn't do what they were supposed to do today. So I did everything I was supposed to do, but they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Like, just so you're aware, I'm really good. They're not, right? That's the way that it appears as we read through Scripture. And then this chosen child, the one that gets this beautiful coat from his father, says, hey, I had this dream. This is the most amazing dream. I hope that you guys understand this dream, because I am the one who does what Dad says all the time, and you guys aren't. And so what I think this dream is telling me is that we went out into a field and we were gathering crops, and through the process of that, the bundle that I had gathered rose up above all of your stalks, and they were not happy. And so I want to begin reading in Genesis chapter 37. Verse 8, it says this: his brothers responded to him, so you think you're going to be our king, do you? Because that's what they thought, right? That's the first thing that, of course, your stalks were raised higher, Mr. Goody Two-Shoes, because you're the one that tells on everybody, right? You think that you're better than everyone else. And so that's what they say. So you think you're going to be king, do you? Do you actually think that you will reign over us? And then listen to this. It says they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way that he talked about them. They hated him. Now, I don't know about you, but hate to me is a pretty strong word. And in fact, I often talk to people about the idea of offense. And when people get offended, there's this process that they go through. And offense leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate ultimately leads to death. Right? So if they're at hate now, what comes next? Death, right? This is the next phase of it. And so we're going to be talking today about this idea of the difference between being chosen and being rejected. In this scenario right here, he's rejected. It doesn't get any more rejected than having someone hate you, does it? I mean, like, they just hated it. Now, I'm not saying that I would have been a little bit mad at my brother. I'm just saying. Now, he was the youngest, and I'm the youngest, and so maybe as I read through this story, I understand my older brother and my older sister's thoughts about me when we were little. Because they used to think, what? I got away with everything. Every baby in the family stand up. No, I'm just kidding. Right? Don't say. But we have to unite against our older brothers and sisters. Right? We've got to come together because they think something that's not true. And they're rejecting us all the time, even though they say that they're not. We know that they are. Just kidding. Kind of. I'll let you figure out which part I'm just kidding about. But that's what it is, right? That they had rejected him. They had made a decision that we hate him. for all the things that my brother and sister thought about me, when I was young, I never thought that they hated me initially. So he, being Joseph, says, guess what? I had another dream. It's another dream. And this time he tells his parents about the dream. And his parents are like, Jacob said, I don't know about this stuff. You think we're going to worship you too? This is the way this is going to work. You're going to be the king over all of us. You're going to reign over all. You're the guy. Please don't tell that to anybody else. We don't want anybody else talking about you this way. This is not a good idea. And so they just hated him all the more, right? And so the older brothers, they go out and they start working the fields. And so Jacob says, Joseph, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you out, and I want you to check on your brothers, see how they're doing, and then I want you to come back, and I want you to give me a report. I need to know what it is that they're doing. So could you go out and check on them? So he goes and tries to find them, and sure enough, he finds them working in the field. Now, he didn't immediately run home and say, this time they're doing a good job, right? Like he goes to them, and in verse 18 it says this, when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him at a distance, right? They saw him coming. It says this, and as he approached, they made plans to kill him. Because offense leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to death. They had rejected him. And this is what they said, here comes the dreamer, right? They couldn't even stand the thought of him. Verse 20, it says, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns. We'll tell our father a wild animal has eaten him, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. They just hated every aspect of him, couldn't stand the thought of him. And so they were going to be done with him. I see lots of things happening in our world today where people just absolutely hate and reject other people. The level of hate in our public discourse is alarming to me. My wife Sarah and I, we were having a discussion this week, and we were talking about a younger person, and they have a huge event that's happened in their life. And this is what they said. Basically, if you're over 35, don't come talk to me. Just stay away from me. I'm just guessing that person's parents might be over 35. I may be wrong, but I think so. And certainly their grandparents. And I was just having a conversation. Man, if I could just have one more conversation with my grandpa. Like the amount of wisdom that my grandfather had. And was my grandfather perfect? No. Did he have silly sayings like slicker than snot on a doorknob? Yes. Right? Like I don't even know what that means. But now you know what I say? Yes. Slicker than snot on a doorknob. I don't get it. I don't understand it. That was the wisdom that my grandpa had, and I would take anything to have that moment back with him. Why is there so much rejection in our world today? Listen, it stays the course. In verse 26, it says, Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. It's not enough to kill him. We want him completely out of our lives, and we want him so far out of our lives that we don't have to deal with the cover-up stuff. We'll just send him away, sell him off, see what we can get for him. I mean, he probably can work a little bit. We can get a little bit of money for him if we just sell him. We don't have to deal with this all the time, cover-up stuff. I think that most of the time when people reject you, it's because they feel like they have something to gain. Right? Like if I reject you, if I can somehow make you lower, then I can become, well, that sounds a little bit like the story, right? Like if I could reject you, then you become lower and I become higher. I become elevated, right? Like I'm now the person. I'm the big shot. I'm the one that is super smart. If I can just reject you, if I can make other people reject you. We live in a culture that's full of rejection. Calling people out and trying to make sure that we cancel everybody. It's not enough just to cancel alive people. Now we're canceling dead people. People that can't possibly defend themselves. We got to make sure that we cancel them because we may have disagreed with one aspect of their lives. One thought that they had, one simple action that they had. We have to reject them completely. That's what the world looks like. But lest we become overwhelmed that we've been rejected, that somebody might have rejected us, it's really important that we remember that Jesus was rejected. In Mark chapter 6, it says this, the next Sabbath he began teaching in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Now, this is the way that this starts. He's teaching, and people are amazed. Is that good or bad? Let me try what Rich said. If people are amazed at you, is it good or bad? Good. It's good, right? It's good. Maybe there are people that are amazed at you and it's bad. But most of the time, when we think of people being amazed at something that you said or did, then it's good. And so this is the way that it is. They were amazed. They asked, where did you get all this wisdom and the power to perform such miracles? It's good, see? Where did you get such wisdom? This is good. Listen to verse 3. Immediately in verse 3 it says this. Then they scoffed. He's just a carpenter's son. Or he's just a carpenter, the son of Mary and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. And his sisters live right here among us. And they were deeply offended and refused to believe in him. So they went from being amazed to now suddenly they're offended. They don't like what could he have said? What could he? That's the way that it works, right? That he said something, cancel him. What's he know anyway? He's just a carpenter. As if carpenters are dumb. I don't know what that comes from. Right? Why does it matter that he was just a carpenter? Why does it matter that he's just Mary's son? What does that matter? Oh, well, he comes from Mary? Must be dumb. Can't surely have wisdom. What? Why is that? I mean, have you ever just stopped to think about some of the things that Scripture says? It's, hey, he's the son of Mary. Must mean not amazing. Right? Must mean that. Has to mean that. Comes from Beckley. Must mean not smart. Right? West Virginia. Right? People in Western Virginia. That's what smart people say. People in Western Virginia. Why are they going at him? They were deep. It says they were deeply offended. Offense leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to death. They're rejecting him. They're trying to find every reason they can to reject him. Have you been rejected? Who in your life has rejected you? Listen to this. Jesus said in verse 4, a prophet is honored everywhere except his own town and among his relatives and his own family. Because, they know you. Man, that should sting a bit. They were amazed, and then suddenly they were not. Listen, this is so powerful. And because of their unbelief, he couldn't do any miracles among them except to place his hands on a few sick people and heal them. Because of their unbelief, because they made him common, he couldn't do anything. Because they rejected him. Think about it like this. Because they rejected him, then he was powerless in their life. Jesus was rejected in his hometown. The rejections that sting the most are often because we have rejection that comes from family. Man, when my parents got divorced, I was playing sock basketball in a room in our house. And my mom called me into the living room. And I don't even, we never had discussion about this stuff. But I can remember when she said, hey, Quint, can you come into the living room? I can remember saying, and I don't know if I vocalized it or if I just said it in my head. I said, I bet she's going to tell me that her and Dad are getting divorced. It's like we never had those discussions. Like I just knew. So I went in and sat down, and she told me that sure enough that her and my dad were going to get divorced, and we had this conversation, and I was overwhelmed. And she said this, and she didn't mean for it, I don't think, the way that it came out, but she said, you know, if you hadn't been born, then we would have got divorced a long time ago. We really didn't want you. Now, it took me 30 years to recognize that affected my life. It greatly impacted what I thought of myself. It was huge. And it was this process that began where I started having feelings like people were just constantly going to reject me and leave me, that I wasn't good enough for anybody. And so one day, my sister, who was my best friend growing up because my parents are divorced, and my brother's 7 years older, so he was kind of, he was old enough to do his own thing and go out and do stuff. And my sister had to watch me, so and we're still close. My sister and I are really close to this day. But my sister was my best friend, and she dropped me off at school and said, bye, Quinn, I'll see you after school. And she didn't pick me up, and I had to walk home, and it was 2.5 miles to my house. So I had to walk home, and when I got home, all of her clothes were gone. That day, she dropped me off at school and boarded a plane and flew out to California. And she left me, you know what I mean? I don't know really what she left, but in my mind, she left me. The hardest rejection often comes from your family, but it's not just family. It's friends too. Now, given this baggage that I had never dealt with and didn't have anybody to talk to about, it was difficult having relationships. It was just difficult for me. I just assumed that everyone was going to leave me, and I didn't know that initially. So I started, developing relationships as I grew older, and so when I got to high school, I had two friends that were two of my best friends, Brian and Craig, and they were 2 years older than I was. Now, I didn't think anything about it when we were in 8th grade and sophomore. That didn't even register. But when they were seniors and I was a sophomore, they had big decisions to make. And they came home together one day. We lived in the same neighborhood, and they came home and they said, hey, we registered and signed up, and we're both leaving to go to the Marines. Now, they weren't even thinking about me, right? I was not in the picture. They didn't think, I wonder what Quentin's going to think about whether or not we're going to go to the Marines. That was not a thought. But you know what I thought? I thought collectively they had made a decision that they needed to get away from me. I had been rejected. I'd been rejected by my parents. I'd been rejected by my sister. And now I had been rejected by my best friends. And so I'd started deciding this is what's going to happen. People are just going to reject me. And so I'll let you get a little bit close, but I'm not going to let you get really close. And when you start to get really close, if I think that I'm going to mess it up, because eventually, listen, y'all that have spent time with me, it's a risk. I'm going to say or do something y'all aren't going to like. It's just the reality. And I know that. And I try to tell people all the time, if we've been around each other long enough, that it's likely that I've said or done something that's hurt you or offended you. And if you've been around me long enough, it's likely that you've certainly done something that's already offended me. But we have to agree to love each other, right? Now, I know that now. But growing up, I did not know that. And so here I thought all these people were leaving me. So what I'll do is I'll just set up a system in my life so that I don't have to deal with rejection. So there won't be any rejection. There won't be any rejection in my life. I won't have to deal with rejection. Why? Because I'll make sure that I distance myself anytime people get close. And so I would sabotage relationships just so I didn't have to deal with rejection. Maybe it's just me. But I can't get close. I can't risk the deal of how I would feel being rejected. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. And it carried into work. It carried into work. Most of you know I was on staff here in 2016. And I love being here. Like, I think this is the best place in the whole world. Just me, sorry. I think this is incredible. I think what we get to do here at iHeart is the most amazing thing ever. I see God blessing this place in ways I've been in ministry for 25 years, and I see God doing things here that I've not seen him do anywhere. And so I was here, and things were going really well, but I knew me. Like, I had done some stuff that I thought my family chose to leave me about. I'd done some stuff that I thought my friends chose to leave me about, and I just knew I was going to do something, and Pastor Brandon was going to say, get out of here. And so I got an opportunity, and the church had contacted me, and I could set it up. I could just leave. He wasn't going to have to, right? I wasn't going to have to be rejected by him. Not him. I didn't want to be rejected by him. Of all people, I didn't want to be rejected by Pastor Brandon. So I'll just leave. It'd be easier. And so I left. Because I was afraid of being rejected. My whole life has been altered because I've not always experienced rejection, but certainly felt like I was experiencing rejection. And it happens everywhere, in every aspect of your life. You're going to get the opportunity to be rejected with every decision that you make. Fortunately, for me, Pastor Brandon has never rejected me. Ever. But more importantly, neither has Jesus. Jesus has never rejected me. Even though of all people who have reason to reject me, it would be Jesus. Jesus has never rejected me. And you need to hear this. No matter who else rejects you, Jesus never will reject you. He's never rejected you. He's never made a decision, it's too far. You've done too much. You've gone too far. We're not gonna receive that. Jesus, no matter what you've done, Jesus never rejects you. That he chooses you. In fact, in John 15, it says this: you didn't choose me. That's what Jesus says. You didn't choose me. I chose you. I chose you, and I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit so that the Father will give you whatever you ask for using my name. Jesus has chosen you. You didn't choose him. He chose you. He chose you long before you have an opportunity to choose him. He chose you. And unlike other people in your life, you'll never, ever, ever have to worry about whether or not he rejects you. And sometimes church people make it seem like Jesus rejects people. But Jesus never rejects people. You know why? Because he knew you before you were born. Listen to this in Jeremiah. It says this: I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as my prophet to the nations. Before you were born, he chose you. He appointed you for this day, in this time, right here, right now, in this moment of your life. He chose you and said, this is the time that I'm going to give them to live in this moment, to do my work here and now, and I will give you everything that you need to carry out my will in their life, if you will believe that he has chosen you. But if you decide, hey, everyone else in my life has rejected me, and so I think Jesus will reject me, what are the chances that you're going to carry out his will in your life? You have to recognize that Jesus has never rejected, not at any moment has he rejected you. Well, you don't understand. One time I prayed and it didn't go the way that I wanted. I don't understand that either. But he hasn't rejected you. Psalm 27 says this, even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Listen, if everyone else on earth rejects you, then he's still going to hold you. He keeps you close. Not like on a shelf somewhere. Close. He holds you tight because he loves you, because he will never leave you nor forsake you. And he says, even though everyone else decides something against you, and mind you, I had people in my life that I thought rejected me that I don't really believe rejected me. I was just agreeing with the lies of the enemy about what other people thought about me. That other people rejected me. I don't think every time that I felt rejected, I was actually rejected. But every time that I've thought God has rejected me, that's a lie. Because he would never, ever reject me. In Ephesians chapter 1, it says this, even before he made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes. Look at that. That God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes. Verse 5, God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Christ Jesus. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure that he has chose you, he's adopted you, he's brought you into the family, he makes you a co-heir with Christ, as Pastor Brandon talked a couple weeks ago, that he makes you part of the family. You're full-on family with Christ. Why? Because he loves you, and he's never going to reject you, ever. You're never going to have to worry about being rejected by him, ever. And it's not just, listen, it's not just that I'm a chosen person. We are a chosen people. Right? Because if it were just about me being chosen, then I might be like Joseph. One day, I had this dream, and you all are going to bow to me. That's what my dream said. Because I'm chosen, and you aren't. That's not the way that it works. He chose you when he formed you in your mother's womb. But listen, he chose us collectively to be his people. We are God's people. He chose us before we were born. 1 Peter chapter 2, it says, but you're not like that, for you're a chosen people. You're a royal priest, a holy nation, God's very own possession. And as a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness and into his wonderful light. And in Deuteronomy 14:2, it says this, you've been set apart as holy to the Lord your God. You've been set apart, that he has chosen you from all the nations of the earth to be his own special treasure. We are God's people, that he chose us. Why does that matter? Because he's given us the ministry of reconciliation. So if I am certain that I am chosen by God, if I am chosen by God, and we are God's chosen people, then part of my job as his child is to make sure that I choose you. I think Pastor Brandon got this, and I didn't. He chose me, and he's chosen you because we're part of the family of God. Not because he's high and mighty, not because he thinks highly of himself, but because he knows he's chosen, and he wants you to know that you're chosen. He wants you to see that you are chosen. If we could just get what we are as followers of Christ, that we are chosen as individuals and we are chosen as God's people, then might we walk out into this world when we leave here a different way. Might we leave this building looking different than when we came here, when we recognize that Jesus will never, ever reject us, that I don't have to worry about the things that I've done. I don't have to carry a heavy burden in here. I can give that to God, and I know he's not going to reject me for it. He's not going to look down upon me for it. He's going to receive it well and allow me to be lighter when I leave, that I can have joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control because of the work of God in my life, because he chose me, not just because of how good I've been, but he chose me before I was born. He chose me when he formed me in the womb. He chose me whenever he picked out my parents. He chose me whenever he allowed me to have a brother and sister. He chose me when he brought me to West Virginia. He chose me, he chose me, he chose me, he chose me. Listen, and he chooses you. Will you choose him? All you have to do is receive him. He's already made a way for you. No hoops, no special tricks. If you believe that Jesus is who he says he is, if you believe that God raised Jesus from the dead, if you confess it, if you believe that, if you confess him as Lord, you will be saved. It's the only thing at the moment that separates any of us from him is belief that he's chosen you. That he's chosen you. Though no one else might, he already has.